So you set your NFL best ball rankings, or you downloaded the legendary upside rankings or the spike week rankings, or maybe both. You're flipping back and forth. You hop into the draft, and a player falls way past ADP, but you still don't have him that highly ranked. What do you do? How do you determine whether to draft off of ADP or to draft off of rankings? How do you handle stacking? How do you handle your roster construction? How do you balance all of these things with your player rankings? That's what we're going to get into today on Legendary Sickos, a legendary upside and spike week collaboration. Let's do it.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Pat, we're back off a little mini break, and I have to ask, did you get to go touch some grass over the course of the last week? Because we are soon to be into training camp time and absolute gauntlet best ball drafting time, where we're all just, sitting at our computers or on our phones and thinking about nothing but best ball and drafting teams. So did you get to enjoy yourself and get out in the nice weather for at least a little bit, maybe play some pickleball?
I did, yeah. I got to touch some grass, literally touch some grass. I was in San Diego for the week, and that was really nice.
San Diego.
Yeah, it's like beautiful there right now. They got like a ton of rain over the spring, so like everything's like blooming. There's like I literally stopped and smelled some flowers at one point along the walk. I was like, wow, I'm really taking this literally here.
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, it was quite a nice week. Recharged, although I will say, I mean, I did draft out there. There was like a time I went to a brewery at one point and just like ripped off a few different drafts. And there was a couple different windows where I was able to get some drafts in. But overall, it was definitely kind of a recharge, relaxation type of week, and ready to get in the home stretch here.
Yeah, we are definitely about to enter the home stretch training camp coming up, and I'm going to be a better business person. And before we dive into the conversation today, we're going to read a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of promo. But if you're listening to this, I mean, it's titled with Sicko in the title. You're probably playing best ball pretty seriously, or you're about to get into playing best ball pretty seriously here as the heart of fantasy football season approaches. We have a fun little promo for you guys between Spike Week and Legendary Upside. If you are signed up, which is a very cheap, incredibly cheap, as Pat always says, you would be doing yourself a disservice. You're costing yourself money if you don't sign up for Legendary Upside and subscribe there. But if you are subscribed to Legendary Upside, you have available to you a 40% off discount for Spike Week. We have monthly subscriptions, which are $40, and we have an NFL package, which is $300, which will take you all the way through the end of the NFL season. So playoff best ball, in-season best ball, tracking your teams during the season. All of those things will be available to you. But specifically, if you sign up for Legendary Upside, you get a 40% off discount, which is kind of crazy. Like I said, as Pat said, that's a big number. I was shopping on Prime Day, the last couple of days on Amazon Prime, and I was struggling to find 40% off deals even on Amazon. So I feel like in the heart of Prime Bezos. Day, Bezos, we're dunking on Amazon here with this deal. But I have found, and I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is relevant to this kind of rankings versus ADP versus what do I do with I need to stack versus does this player fit my structure versus my exposures, right? If you have a player ranked very highly, but you don't want to have 70% of an individual player, how do you handle all of these things? And it comes back to kind of your rankings versus the ADP, specifically ADP when you're in a draft room, I think is something a lot of the times we can take for granted because it's so much more about once you're in that room, right? We can't tell you, we could sit here and talk till the cows come home, which we do a lot about do this, do that from a macro perspective. But once you get in the draft room, you have to make decisions because you're drafting against 11 other humans and they may leave you a player. Maybe you don't even love that player, right? But you reach a certain point where he's 2 rounds past ADP. Maybe now he starts to line up more with your ranks. And how do you handle those kinds of things, both in a draft and when we flip over the cards on Thursday Night Football in week 1? do you want it to align more, your exposures in your portfolio with exactly how you have your rankings? Or do you want to, have it align with kind of everything that played out in a particular draft? And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it is a much tougher question, I think, than maybe most would think about, because it totally plays into how our portfolio looks at the end of the summer. And I have plans for what my portfolio might look like, but if I take a rankings based approach versus an ADP based approach, the portfolio is going to look wildly different.
Yeah, it's just like, it's way more difficult in best ball, is like someone who creates rankings and, puts them out there for people to use. I'm sort of like, I have this whole thing. If my rankings, have this whole preamble. Here's I recommend doing this, blah blah blah. And someone was just like, "Hey, can you like move that below the fucking rankings though?" So I don't have to scroll past that every time. Like, yeah, that's actually a good note. I'll do that. But now it's like, no one's gonna read it. No one's gonna. But it's which is fine. But it's also just sort of a thing I think through of like, there's certain players where I'm like, I want to move this player up. You guys have kind of, you and Sean and Pete and Ben have just been slowly, whittling, chipping me. And, there's everybody from all sides. I'm just getting Ritter. Move them up. So I'm like, all right, you know what? Howell's still a bad pick, but I'm in on Ritter. You guys got me on Ritter.
I like it. I like it.
Job security thing has been a big thing. I generally don't like to take players who I think have legitimate bench risk for week 17, since week 17 is all that matters. But I'm starting to think like, look, you're already betting on Drake London and Kyle Pitts. On those teams, Ritter, if he got benched, you lose. Like, Heineke's probably not going to be able to support those guys the way you're hoping.
Not to a tournament winning level, right? Like it'd be probably more like Marcus Mariota last year, which was, they got occasionally there on the volume because they're awesome players earning volume, but Mariota was so bad that they weren't going to win you the tournament.
Right. And now there's some weird stuff, the Titans are absolutely atrocious and they trade for Tannehill early in the season or something. There's some weird thing, but in the vast majority of outcomes, if I've made good picks with Pitts and London, or London, maybe you don't have them both, but even if you have one, you really are betting that Ritter takes a step forward and does not get benched. So on those teams, I've come around to the idea of, okay, let's go ahead and take Ritter. He's got some rushing upside as well. So I've moved him now ahead of ADP, but I think he's a pretty terrible pick if you're just taking him without London or Pitts, right? I mean, maybe you could take him with Bijan, I guess, but it's this tricky thing where, how do I communicate that in the rankings? You kind of can't. It's just sort of like, if you're drafting off my rankings, you'll see Ritter at the top. But I mean, it's really the correlation aspect of this that's so important, where if you were just drafting a fantasy team, you could literally just draft off rankings in a 12-team league. You would want to factor in ADP enough so that you're not giving up value to the point where you're taking a player in the 5th that you could have gotten easily in the 6th.
Right.
You don't want to draft off rankings to that point. But outside of that, you could just draft straight off rankings. And honestly, there are stretches of a draft. I've been in this position before where, the next 3 players I want all have ADPs in the 6th round, and I'm in the 5th round. So I'm just going to grab one in the 6th and hope I can get the 3rd and 7th or something. Or even grab one in the 4th, grab one in the 5th, and grab one in the 6th. If I'm in a 12-team league, I think this ADP is absolutely atrocious. I'm on some random site with horrendous ADP, and it's like you don't care about. You don't care about it. I mean, Draftkings ADP is excellent compared to some of these other sites.
That's true.
You don't care about closing line value. It's a 12-team league, so you don't have to worry about all that stuff, and you don't care about the correlation because it's a 12-team league. But in these, we could pencil in our desired exposure to the entire player pool, right? You could sit down and say, I want X% of Kyle Pitts, X% of, Rashad Bateman, whatever. You could create a portfolio that accomplishes that, and it's like your perfect portfolio. You could create a portfolio with the same percentages on each player, and those teams could be horrendous because they don't have any correlation. You haven't built in, right? It's like getting your portfolio to the right percentage on each player is not the only thing we're trying to do here.
And you adding on to that, you can get your exposures right. That's like you said, it's so funny because you can't just do the drafts and say, I'm taking this draft out. I mean, you can do whatever the hell you want. But in terms of accomplishing a goal, you can't just hop in the draft, right? I entered the draft on my phone and like, oh, they gave me this player, they gave me this player, they gave me that player, drafting off of ADP in this example, and just take whatever the room gives me. And because then when you flip over the cards, if you did have player takes or strategic takes, you wanted to draft more of a certain structure, you wanted to do this, that, or the other thing. When you flip over the cards in week 1, you're not going to have achieved that strategic macro level portfolio goal. Now, you may say, I don't have that portfolio goal. I'm just going to win every draft, get the best ADP value. And I think that's a reason. That's fine. But you also can't do the thing, like you said, where I have this portfolio. I want 25% Kyle Pitts. I want 25% whatever, Miles Sanders. I want X percentages of all these guys. And so I'm going to go in and make sure that I'm constantly massaging that and smoothing that out, because the draft isn't always going to they're not going to be the appropriate pick in every single draft, right? You may get 19% Kyle Pitts because the draft just didn't dictate that you get him in the best way possible. Now, again, that isn't always correct either. You could just say, I'm going to get 50% Kyle Pitts. I'm going to reach on him. I don't care, whatever. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying if you're trying to achieve kind of multiple different goals of optimizing your portfolio, you can't just do it one way or the other. And it's really, really freaking hard to balance it. And that is, honestly, it's probably one of, if not the biggest struggle that I personally have as a best ball drafter, is I have macro level goals and player takes and rankings that say one thing. But then in a draft, oftentimes the things that the draft is telling you to do are in opposition to what that is, right? I don't like the Tampa Bay Bucks. I originally in May or whatever, I kind of told myself that, I don't mean this for anyone that has this take, but I felt lazy myself making that take, saying like, yeah, they're still really good, and the market's going to dunk on right Godwin and Evans and Rashad White and whatever. And so, look at the Seahawks last year. It was like, look, everybody said the Seahawks would suck. Why can't the Bucks just be the Seahawks? And I hadn't really thought everything through, and that was my take. I'm taking Godwin, and I'm taking Evans, and I'm taking Rashad White, taking K-Dot and whatever. But now, kind of as time has gone on, I've done hundreds of drafts. I kind of don't really care much about the Bucks. But if I'm taking in a room, and Rashad White is multiple rounds past ADP, I actually have Rashad White ranked more closely to some of the other players that are multiple rounds after him. If I'm just drafting off ADP, I'm taking Rashad White. If I'm just drafting off of my ranks, I may not actually still take Rashad White. So those things are in direct opposition to each other. Mike Evans is a big example of that. Chris Godwin now, especially as he's been the one that's kind of risen on underdog specifically for the Tampa Bay Bucks, I don't really take him anymore. Again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's my specific player take. You could say I love the Bucks, and that's fine. But they're in direct opposition to one another, right? He never falls anymore, by the way, Chris Godwin.
I've seen him fall a little bit. I think he came up into the early 5th, and now he's sort of more on the 5-6 turn.
Maybe it's coming, but Deontay's really coming up.
Deontay's coming. He's screaming up.
I mean, Deontay's going to be in the fourth. Deontay's going to be in that fourth round.
What happened?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't even take him anymore. Because
he was like a late 6th round pick like a month ago.
It was amazing. He was in that more like the Gabe Davis, Tony, Jahan Dotson area of the draft. You could easily double tap Deontay and Pickens if you wanted there. You could get the fun Seattle and Deontay pairings for week 17.
I'm at 9%, but I didn't know. I mean, I'd be at 20% if I knew it was going to be at the opposite turn.
Yeah, he's gonna be in the 40s soon. I feel like, which is whatever. I'm not trying to be pro Deontay or against Deontay here, but there's another example of like I actually had him ahead of ADP before. Another variable of factoring in ADP is like ADP is ever changing, right?
And we're trying to predict which guys are going to rise in value. That the one that I find the Deontay one kind of confounding because I'm like, nothing changed, and
literally
yet
nothing.
And I guess probably what changed is that some influential people pointed out that Deontay Johnson gets open very easily and has for years, and will continue to do so this year. And who cares if he didn't score any touchdowns last year? And I am paid attention to that.
Yeah, and I am definitely not influential, but funnily enough, one of my I've stopped posting on Twitter for like actual fantasy content and stuff. It's just promotional now. But when I was still kind of earlier in the summer, I was pro Deontay at his old cost.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like a couple basic tweet thread or whatever that was like, in 2021, Deontay scored like 7 or 8 touchdowns or something like that. And I believe his volume was actually lower. Like his role in the offense was lower. His air yards were lower. Everything was worse in 2021. He just scored touchdowns. And then in 2022, he's actually an absolute target dominator. He gets open at an elite rate. We can, haggle about exactly how valuable it is getting open 2 yards from the line of scrimmage, which is kind of what he does, and being 5'10", blah blah blah. But
he plays outside. That's the other thing with Deontay. Like he's not a slot receiver. People sometimes act like he is. He's not. He doesn't get open only a few yards downfield, but at least it's on the outside.
Yeah, exactly. There's more room to create yards, at least when you get open. If you're getting 3 yards open outside the numbers versus 3 yards open in the slot, like you're by all the linebackers and the nickel backs and the safeties and stuff. There's nowhere to go. But point being, it's just funny because again, with this ADP thing, I was just like, I don't know. This seems kind of silly that Deontay went so maybe this will be appropriate. Deontay went 4th, 5th round, or give or take, last year. And he was a pretty reasonable pick in that range. And now despite wide receivers rising up, despite Kenny Pickett being in his second year, despite them really adding no target competition, unless you think Allen Robinson's going to Undertaker.gif, which, spoiler alert, he's not. Like, nothing has changed. Maybe it's gotten better for Deontay. And people were like, oh, that does make a lot of sense. I love Deontay, whatever. And it's been slow till recently, but he's just skyrocketed up. And so again, I had him ranked ahead of ADP. I was taking him back then. But like, no matter when you took him in May, you got ADP value, or closing line value,
for sure,
basically. And so that's another thing you have to weigh when you get into the draft, right? Like, you could get ADP if you got. I'm trying to think of somebody who's really, really fallen, right? I can't off the top of my head think of necessarily anybody.
Goddard's fallen.
Goddard. So Goddard falls, right? You took Goddard and you liked Goddard in May. You took Goddard at pick 72 or what? I'm just making something up. He's going around pick 72. You took him, in the late 70s or something. You're like, boom, he was there, got ADP value or whatever.
Yeah, if you're grabbing 6th round Goddard, Goddard's coming back around. We saw 8th round Goddard last night in a Best Ball Mania. And you can regularly get him.
I think Waller might pass him. I think Waller might pass Goddard. You have to weigh all of these things, right? This ends up being kind of a theme of a lot of the shows that we do, but because it's important, is we want to talk about rankings versus ADP because it's really important. But a lot of the times there's like 5 other variables that have to come in. And in this specific example is like, yeah, you might get ADP value at the draft, but if the guy falls 2 rounds, did you really get ADP value? No. Right. And so in that case, if you had him ranked lower, right? So Goddard falls to, again, making this up as an example, Goddard from May to August falls 2 rounds. You had him beyond ADP when you were in a draft in May. You were like, he's not the best player on my board when I'm on the clock here in 6th, early 7th or whatever. But then he falls and you say, okay, now he's an ADP value, so I'm going to take him. Was that right or wrong? Because in August, he's actually still not an ADP value where you got him then. He was an ADP value in your draft, right? And it's like, how do you actual practical sense, go into a draft and say, I need to do this. You're never going to be perfectly right, but you do need to be thinking about these things, right? Like, here's a faller, a later faller, Jalen Hyatt, who I'm now taking a lot.
It's a good one.
I'm now taking a lot. He was really expensive, especially relative to now what he was, and I kind of like him, but I didn't really like him at pick.
I hated him before. I thought he was one of the worst values on the board, like legitimately one of the worst picks on the board. Also, Josh Downs. I thought Josh Downs and Hyatt were both two of the worst picks on the board. You can get Cedric Tillman is completely free. Okay. He's a 3rd round pick. Jalen Hyatt and Josh Downs were going as like 14th rounders because we thought they might be 1st round picks.
Right.
And then they weren't. And then they still went in the 14th round. Mm-hmm. But it's like, why? Okay, I've got a big body deep threat on the Browns who's completely free. And I've got Jalen Hyatt, who's a little deep threat on the Giants, who, like, his path to snaps is sort of, it's not equally murky because it's so hard to predict what the Giants are going to do that there's a chance that Hyatt's just like the guy. Whereas Tillman's obviously not just the guy. But it's still like, is he really even going to play that much as a rookie? He might not. I mean,
nope.
This is a coaching staff that didn't really play Gabe Davis much as a rookie. And obviously he's not emerged into a star, but I mean, he's been a big hit for a team as a day 3 guy.
Absolutely.
So it would not surprise me at all if Hyatt was essentially redshirted, especially because he was pretty raw. He's a 3-year player, 1 productive season, gimmicky offense, basically did one thing. He ran out of the slot. He did deep shots out of the slot is like his whole thing. Wouldn't shock me at all if he barely played. So I was like, I'm not taking this dude. However, now that he's free, I take him a fair amount.
He's gone undrafted. He's gone undrafted sometimes in drafts now. Yeah.
I'm at like 7% now. And I'm way overweight on Downs, who's become free. Because I'm like, Downs is playing out of the slot. Now he's a slot receiver for an incredibly inaccurate quarterback on short routes. So that's not ideal. But like, what if Downs is not a underneath guy? What if he's stretching the defense a little bit? Because that's one of the things they talk about with Downs is like, he's actually a great contested catch player, even though he's small. He can maybe be a little bit more dynamic out of the slot than you might think. So I've actually now started kind of hammering Downs now that he's free. So that's when these players shift in value. I kind of think like, it's almost like their archetype changes, like when
I like that
Jalen Hyatt's in round 13 or 14, you're asking him to be a somewhat productive player for you over the course of the season. When he's in round 18, you're asking him to show up once for you in the fantasy playoffs. Once. If he shows up in week 15, 16, or 17, it was an amazing pick. In a meaningful way where he helps you get through one of those rounds or contributes to your week 17 lineup. Then it's like it's a smash. So you have to think through, can Josh Downs or Jalen Hyatt really help me advance this team? No, they can't really. But they definitely, as rookie wide receivers who could be very good, we don't know, who did get drafted on day 2, they definitely could contribute a single spike week for you in the fantasy playoffs.
And with the wide range of outcomes that exist, like you said, the difference, it seems like, we get into the double-digit rounds, who cares? And I will say, not specific to those guys, but at wide receiver, when you do get into the 12th, 13th, 14th round of these drafts on underdog again, specifically, you tell me which guy's going to be really good. We call it I like to call it the juju zone. Once we cross the Bateman line, and we get into the juju zone. It's like, I don't know. These guys all suck, like really bad. But to that point, there's opportunity cost at taking a player, any player there, right? At least I know Juju's going to play. There's opportunity cost taking a player there because there are still good quarterbacks available. There are
good running backs.
Depending upon what you think about, tight ends, Chig, Freiermuth, Njoku, Schultz, Kincaid, all those kind of guys. And the running backs there are by far my favorite. It's probably my favorite pocket of the draft outside of the top 5, I guess. It's my favorite pocket of the entire draft. Those running backs in rounds 9 through 12 or 13.
And it's a
because
consistently fertile area for the position.
Yes. Yeah. For years and years and years. And now the quality of that player is even better than it has ever been before. That is in that range of the draft, because running backs as a whole have gotten cheaper, right? You're getting I'm making this up. You're getting the RB 35 in round 11, as opposed to the RB 35 was like a freaking 7th round pick 5 years ago, so it's very, very different. So taking that player, and again, if you took Jalin Hyatt in May at pick 140 or whatever, you could have got him as an ADP value. You could have got him at pick 160. You could have got him at pick 180 back then. And you posted that shit to Twitter, and you said, look at all this ADP value that I just got. I got Jalin Hyatt 40 picks past ADP. I got this guy 30 picks past ADP Downs, right? I took Downs and I took Hyatt, and I got crazy value on him. And then we get to this point where you and I are talking right now. And guess what? You overpaid for those players because they have fallen by that much. And so I had Hyatt and Downs ranked way below ADP back then, but above this current ADP. Mm-hmm. And so I needed to know that, and I needed to use that, as well as kind of industry sentiment, talking to you, listening to other people, and saying, like, I think I'm going to be able to get a better price on these guys. You're not always going to be right about that, but I think I'm going to be able to get a better price on these guys because of where I have them ranked. I don't need to take them here, even if they fall, right? Even if I get on the clock in the 15th round and Jalin Hyatt is past ADP, I still don't need to take him because my rankings and my also general intuition of the industry, my rankings say this is still not a good pick. There is a better pick on the board, despite what ADP is telling me. And you have to treat that differently for every single player, but it's really, really important because we can fall into both sides of it. Like you said, I can fall into the rankings and I get to the 7th round and I say, I don't know, I love Rashad Penny. He's my best player on the board in the 7th round. I'm taking him. Well, you probably could have got him in the 11th or the 10th. And so you could have got a player who you do have ranked in the 7th round, who goes in the 7th round, and take him there, and then take Penny in the 10th, right? Make sure you get him. And then on the flip side with Hyatt, you say, oh, he's a crazy ADP faller, but he's still not a good pick to me.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to weigh both of those things.
Yeah. And it's almost kind of like, it is sort of an archetype thing in terms of the way I value the players, right? So like certain players where at the general price that they're at, I'm essentially like not taking. Like I'm not taking Dalvin Cook right now. Like I think he's washed. I think he's going to most likely end up, like, I guess if he lands on the Dolphins, I'll probably feel like I should have taken a little bit. But like a guy who I think is washed, who like might land in a committee on the Dolphins, doesn't seem like a pick that I want to make very often. No. I'll like play catch up a little bit if I need to. But I think like if he lands on the Jets, like I think he's a bad pick. Like at this ADP, yeah. I mean, he's not. Think about his late season upside, and how much is he, if he's washed, how much is he even contributing early in the season? And then down the stretch, like when Breece Hall, and, I'm very bullish on Breece Hall, but from what I understand from the medical community, like he's expected to be at full health, down the stretch, given the clean ACL tear and his recovery.
He might be full health week 1. Like I think it's more likely he's at full health week 1 than he's Dobbins of last year, where you just never really get the full experience.
Me too. But he's my most drafted player, so of course I think that. But I do think, like, if Cook, I just think that Cook's chances, especially the longer he sits out there, he's not getting the money he wants. The Vikings were very clear they were moving on from him. And every advanced metric last year, receiving, rushing, he was atrocious. Like I think he's done. And he's also got this recurring shoulder thing. Like how many red flags
every other week he's got a shoulder problem. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, come on. And so anyway, I'm just like, I'm not taking Dalvin Cook. Like that's just how I feel about it. Right. But if Dalvin Cook were to fall, where's he go now? I don't even know. Because
almost 90. Let's just call it 90.
Let's say he were to fall to round 13 in a given draft. Then I'd be like, this is about as late as I've seen Dalvin Cook go. Right. I have zero exposure to Dalvin Cook. I'll go ahead and take Dalvin Cook here because, it gives me potentially an amazing ADP value. I now have some upside baked in relative, maybe not relative to my rank, which would have Dalvin Cook as like a 17th rounder, which I don't know if that's blasphemy, but that's basically what I think. And so it's not necessarily upside relative to my rank, but I'm in a point where the difference between like a 16th, 17th rounder where I might have him versus a 13th, 14th rounder is not that much. There's something, but it's not huge.
No.
And I'm getting potentially a big value on what the rest of the field will have on this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and grab him there. If Dalvin Cook, let's say, were to fall to the 16th, 17th round, he would probably be a big target for me because I'm drafting a lot of Leonard Fournette. I'm going to be drafting more Hunt. I'm sort of mad at myself. I haven't drafted enough Kareem Hunt. I'm only at 3% on him. Although probably higher if I look at my DraftKings. That's just on Underdog. And then my Ezekiel Elliott, I'm at 5% on. He's the most expensive of those guys. But I'm not ignoring that group. And I've been targeting Fournette probably too much. So if he was part of that group, this kind of washed unsigned, which I view him as one of the 4 washed unsigned.
It's a good name. That's a good bit. Like I'm trying to think of it. Sounds like something from like The Walking Dead or something like that. That's what.
Yeah. Or
be careful. Don't go out. Don't leave the castle or whatever. The washed unsigned are out there.
Yeah, the washed unsigned. I mean, he's one of those guys. That's the group I have him in. Like, does he definitely have more left than Zeke? I don't know. I mean, both were washed to me. I don't know who's less washed. I don't know. But if he were part of that group, then I kind of like taking as a group the washed unsigned because I'm like, I think they will sign, and they might fall into the end zone, and I think their prices will rise once they do sign.
Right.
We've seen that happen a couple times.
Yeah,
Julio.
The Julio. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, so at that point, all of a sudden, this player valuation, which is very negative, as you can tell, it's like, yeah, but I'm probably now going to get closing line value, and the NFL is a highly variant sport, and he can just literally fall into the end zone or end up just in the right situation and be a total smash at this price. So like, it's not that my opinion on the player changes, but is the price changes, it starts to change sort of where a player is, kind of on that spectrum of archetype.
Yeah. So piggybacking on that, because I think it's a perfect kind of segue into the side of things where, okay, I got my rankings, right? And I'm drafting off my rankings. I've uploaded my rankings onto Underdog or onto DraftKings. And the one thing I will say that's really nice about DraftKings is you can flip back and forth between ADP and your rankings, which is nice to be like, to give yourself a sanity check, to be like, okay, here's the top player on the board by ADP, right? Like, so you have, let's just say you have Dalvin way down, right? 16th, 17th, 18th round player in your rankings. Clearly he's going to be the top player on the board by ADP, or he's going to be the, he's going to be very far down the board on your rankings, but he may be the top player on the board by ADP.
By the way, my rankings would never have him that low because I do
adjust for ADP.
I bake in ADP precisely because I'm trying to, like, and this is like, you're trying to communicate like 18 things at once with rankings, but it's like, hey, like, if Dalvin Cook, even as someone who, like, if ADP didn't exist and I was just in this player pool and I'm just trying to pick these players, like, I would be like, well, I'm not going to take Dalvin Cook until very late. Mm-hmm. But ADP does exist. And if I was with you in that draft and we saw Dalvin Cook in the 13th round, I'd be like, I mean, this is a pretty good price. I don't think we're going to get this very often. Let's just go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting part of the whole rankings process you've outlined. Let's start here. It is impossible, physically impossible, with static rankings and I don't mean static like you never change them over the summer. I mean static in a draft, right? Once you upload them, you can't change them once the draft has started, right? The ultimate end goal, which is something we are definitely working on trying to build, it's difficult within the framework of what the sites can do and or allow, but is what I would call dynamic rankings, meaning when I've made a couple of picks, my ranking should be changed, right? Changing, just like your in DFS, your exposure to players changes based on what you're doing with the rest of that lineup, right? If I'm playing Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, my exposure on all the other players on those rosters are going to be drastically different from a Sam Howell and Logan Thomas team. You know what I mean? It's going to be A, salary constraints, but B, the types of players you want around them, et cetera, et cetera. So you would have dynamic rankings that say, you just took Christian McCaffrey in the first round, and then you took Chris Olave, and then you took Lamar Jackson, right? So what should your ranking? Players should be moving up and down, right? Obviously, Bateman and Zay Flowers are going to be moving up. Odell's probably going to be moving up. But maybe Deebo Samuel's moving down, right? Because you took Christian McCaffrey. I'm not saying that he should or shouldn't, but I'm saying depending upon how you decide it, you say maybe Deebo is a negative correlation, particularly at the ceilings with Christian McCaffrey. I want to move him down. Maybe I want to move Brock Purdy up. Maybe I want to move Derek Carr up. Maybe I want to move Jamal Williams down because Jamal Williams takes away from Chris Olave, et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of things should be happening, but we have to do them in our brains. And we have to do these things like everything that you just outlined in your brain as well. Using the Dalvin Cook example, you don't have him very high. And even in that 13th round, he's not a quote unquote value by your rankings.
Well,
but
here's the
yes
thing.
And no. Yes and no. Your raw rankings un-ADP adjusted. If you, like you said,
I'm looking at my raw rankings un-ADP adjusted, and I'd have him much higher than that. But it's because there's this other thing we're trying to do, which is play the closing line value game
and play the market, right?
And play the market.
Also, you also have to be and then I'll let you go. You have to be a little bit humble as well from a rankings perspective. I would never go out and say I 100% know better about every single player in this player pool.
Exactly.
I think I know better about a handful, right? I'm going to go to war over a handful of players this entire season, right? Everybody's different on that. But I mean, dude, like if the market says Dalvin Cook costs this price, I think it's absurd. But then when I get a certain level of value on him, I can say, okay, as you said, he's going at pick 89 right now. Shout out to me for knowing that he was going at pick. That's disgusting that he was going at pick 90. He falls to the 13th or 14th round. I can be humble enough to say, I really don't want Dalvin Cook on my teams, but there is, of course, a scenario in which he's a very good 13th, 14th round pick, setting aside the closing line value and the ADP value and all of that. Now, when you combine that, you combine the closing line value and the ADP value with kind of this humbleness that maybe the market is a little bit more right than I am. I don't know everything about Dalvin Cook. The NFL doesn't know everything about Dalvin Cook right now. How could I possibly know it? So you have to weigh all these different things when you're on the clock, but that's what makes it hard, right? Is because you do have to do that assessment. And
it also as someone making rankings, like I'm doing this thing, right, where I go, what would I do if I was on the board or if I was on the clock, right? And so I have Dalvin Cook at 95 in the pure rank. I wouldn't take him there. But that's because I feel extremely strongly that he is one of the washed unsigned. And that's a player take that I have that not everyone that I trust has, and not certainly what the market believes.
Mm-hmm.
So then I have to think, okay, what's the most prudent course of action, though? The most prudent course of action is probably to think through what is going to happen if Dalvin Cook signs with the Jets, the Dolphins, or the Patriots to his price. And I think with the Jets or the Dolphins, his price will rise.
Definitely the Dolphins, because that's what everybody's been foaming at the mouth over for sure. For multiple months now,
right.
People have been saying, "What if Dolphin?" It's like that's been the case with the washed unsigned for every other running back. Is what can't draft Pollard. What if Zeke comes back? Can't draft whoever. What if can't draft Jerome Ford? What if they bring Hunt back? Can't do this. Blah blah blah. But the Dolphins one has been just like the ringing rumor for such a long time that I think people will not be able to help themselves. Patriots, yeah, I don't know. About,
Patriots.
I don't know about
Patriots will fall. Patriots will
yeah.
fall. Jets, I think he would rise a little bit. because you're going to get this is a signal that Breece Hall isn't ready.
Mm-hmm.
They're going for it. They've decided they need to win this year. They're bringing in Dalvin to make sure that happens. I think that narrative stuff. And so if you I'm comfortable with a 0% Dalvin Cook portfolio this year, unless the prices change dramatically. I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to force that upon an entire group of people. That's a pretty radical position to take on the player pool with a player who's going inside the top 90 picks,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think okay, what if I didn't have that? What if I didn't? Because that could be a bias, honestly. It could be a bias, right? I could be wrong. So what if I didn't have that take and I'm just trying to play the close online value game? Then, where should you be taking Dalvin? And you could argue that you should be mixing him in at ADP right now because in most scenarios he'll rise.
Yeah.
So then I'm going, well, but he's bad. So he's gonna be below ADP for me, but maybe not drastically below ADP. I'm tempted to lower him now as we're talking, but he's, it's like you're trying to balance all of those things as even trying to put the rankings out, because a lot of stuff goes into this where, I'm trying to help people create the best portfolios that they can that don't necessarily reflect every single one of my extreme stances on specific players.
That's I mentioned applying this in drafts, this kind of concept we're talking about here being one of my biggest struggles from a site provider perspective, from a tout perspective or whatever. 100% creating the ranks and figuring out how to appropriately price the like I said,
I just lowered him to 99.
That's great. I'm also going to lower him after we get off here, but how to, right? So I've made it known. We don't have to do the Howell thing or whatever, because you've just capitulated to Howell. So we're going to clip that, and we don't have to talk about it.
Didn't capitulate to Howell. Capitulated to her.
Whatever. You backhanded. It was a backhanded compliment to Howell. You wouldn't admit it, but yeah, but it was still. I'm still calling it a compliment. But so Damian Harris, right, and technically Rashad Penny. Those are my two pet picks in that running back range. I have them if my raw unadjusted ranks, they're way above there. Et cetera. J.K. Dobbins, it's all running backs apparently. Probably because everybody's ruined the wide receiver pricing. You find me the wide receiver that's a fucking screaming value. Everybody is really expensive, so I end up having these kind of radical takes on running backs on both sides. But how much? Because I don't just want to create a total ADP adjustment for every single player, right? It shouldn't be the same theoretically for every single player. You could do that and make it easier, but I want it to be, like you said, actionable for everyone. And we're talking about this because we're providing rankings that people can use, publicly and or pay for. But this is what people should do on their own as well, right? You say, I don't want to use Pat. I listen to Pat and Erik, but I want to then go build my own rankings, right?
Right.
And I love J.K. Dobbins, but I don't want to take J.K. Dobbins in the early third round when he goes in the fifth. Where do I put him? Right? Where do I put him? And piggybacking into this rankings versus ADP, where do I take him? Because if I have this player who I am way above market on, right? I love J.K. Dobbins. Love him. I think he should be in. I'm again making this up. I think he should be right behind Breece. He's my next favorite running back behind Breece. I think he is for me actually. But he should be a late third round pick. But he goes in the fifth. Clearly I want to be overweight J.K. Dobbins, right? With that premise in mind. But then where do I take him? Because I don't always want, right? I want to have 25, 30% J.K. Dobbins in my portfolio. But if I just wait to take him at ADP, I might get a little overweight, but I'm not capitalizing on this edge that I have. So how do you handle those players who you have these radical takes on? We just discussed the one end of it with Dalvin, right? I think this guy's washed. He sucks. I'm fine having 0%, but here's the scenario in which I would take him. What about the opposite end that says, I fucking love this guy. Right? Breece Hall is my favorite player. I want to have him. It's a little tougher with the super early pick, but when you get into a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick that I want to take a huge stand on, when do I take him? How far is too far of a reach, right? When do I reach? When do I push it? that's probably harder even than the Dalvin example.
Yeah. So the Breece Hall one is a really good one. So in the rankings and kind of how I've been playing it, has lined up, basically, I wouldn't say necessarily 1 for 1, but very close, where, early on I had him very high in the rankings, kind of around the 2-3 turn in kind of my pure rankings, before ADP had a little bit of say. And I would be comfortable taking him there a fair amount and absolutely hammering him in the mid third, scooping him with pure bliss in the late third. But, now we've got the potential for Dalvin Cook to go there. And while I don't really think that impacts his late season outlook in a huge way, it certainly dings it. Even the late season outlook, it dings it. And it does probably meaningfully impact what he's going to do early in the season.
Mm-hmm.
So it changes the archetype of bet a little bit. It's more of like, it's closer to a rookie type of bet, it's like more like Jonathan Taylor in his rookie season or something, where you're betting he kind of comes on down the stretch and takes things back. So that's a bet I'm still comfortable making in the late third, actually. But it's not a bet where now I want to be taking him over Mark Andrews every time, who I love, or taking him over Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, and Derrick Henry, who I think are every time, right? I don't want to be underweight those guys. And Hall is going to, if you take him every time, you're going to end up underweight those guys. Lamar Jackson, who I think is a really nice third round value relative to the other quarterbacks. So I'm sort of trying to weigh that. I'm still ahead of ADP on Breece Hall, but just barely now. I've got him at 30, and the ADP is at 31.5 now. So now I'm saying, let's wait. Let's take our late third round Breece. Let's still grab him there. And this is what I'm doing. Let's still grab him there, although I did take him at the 2-3 turn yesterday, but I am sick. But generally, I'm taking him only in the late third. I passed on him at the 3-11 as well because I had Mark Andrews on a Jalen Waddle. Mark Andrews was there, and I had a Jalen Waddle team, and I was like,
Andrews and Breece were there at 3-11.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
Jesus.
So I grabbed Andrews. It hurt. I really wanted that 3-11 Breece, and then I was like, Breece is actually the more likely to come back to me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Andrews, almost assuredly wasn't coming back.
Wasn't coming back. So he didn't come back, but whatever. I made the so. I mean that's sort of the funny thing about drafting too, right? It's like I took Breece probably on the same day. I took Breece at the 301 and passed on him at the 311. So these things can, you're kind of always sort of shifting what you're doing, breaking ties there because I had Waddle and I wanted, and on the other one I took Jefferson and Olave, and I was like, I'm adding Breece to this. This thing's taking this down anyway. So
there was no other part of the decision-making process that would have elevated anyone else over Breece at that. And in fact, you said Jefferson Olave.
Jefferson Olave, yeah.
You want to talk about a unique combination of players? Jefferson Olave is like, no, I'm not saying crazy unique, but I'm just looking really quickly at the ADP. Like Olave doesn't generally fall all the way back to 23. Right, his ADP is 19. So him with Jefferson is already slightly unique. But then you take that and you pull Breece up, who doesn't generally go at the 2-3 turn, right, ahead of all the other running backs, ahead of the quarterbacks, etc. The next thing you know, right, that would actually make Breece a better pick at the 301 than he was at the 311 or the 310 or whatever you said, which is, like you said, it's a very funky thing, but it's true.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking through it. Plus, there's just certain times where I draft on my phone. And I'm listening to my gut sometimes. I'm just like, man, Breece is a really fun way to start with this Jefferson Olave start. Whereas Andrews is the more fun approach when I think it was Adams, Waddle, and then you grab Andrews there. But I'm trying to, like, my thing with Breece is that I'm trying in the rankings to stay ahead of ADP on him right now, but and I've been ahead of ADP the whole time, but now he has changed in that same kind of player archetype thing I was talking about. He has changed from absolute smash, priority target to I still strongly believe in the player profile, but there is a risk that we need to be baking in here, a risk that his ADP could fall significantly, right? Like, and that creates an opportunity. So if you have, if he were to fall to the 5th round, would you rather have, to that point, 20% Brees or 10% Brees? Like, even if you really believe in the player, you'd still rather have only 10% Brees, because now you're going to get 5th round Brees, and you
you're
can
going to
get
take
up
him
to 30%.
every time.
Yeah,
You can get a massive percentage at a much cheaper cost.
At much cheaper cost. So now, so that's the thing where I'm still ahead of ADP on Brees, but just barely. And, I think given the way ADP falls right now, is there that big of a difference between 311 and 501? Like, there really
no.
There really is.
Sometimes I take the guys that go around 501 at 311, because whether it's like a unique combination or it sets up better for this structure, or I'm trying to take 2 guys that go around the 4 or 5 turn. I want to have them both on the same team. It is a very weird part of the draft that it's hard to articulate this particular conversation, because Amari Cooper to me versus Drake London, I don't see a difference. I actually probably prefer Drake London, right? Jerry Jeudy versus Keenan Allen versus Mike Williams versus whatever. I don't know. ETN versus Najee versus Ken Walker versus Dobbins. All these guys, it's just one gigantic tier. So it is definitely a tougher part in that. But that's also important, right? That's also important. Like, if you wanted to say,
it's very important.
Nope, I know, but especially like use the Brees example. If Brees falls into that group, the after Lamar and Andrews and after all the other running backs, where we get into this ginormous flat tier of wide receivers, dead zone running backs, and the next tier of quarterbacks, Burrow, Fields, Herbert. If you wanted to say, I'm just going to take Brees because he's my 30th overall player and I'm going to keep getting him in the 40s and 50s. Yeah, just take him there, right there. I don't give a shit about ADP. I don't give a shit if he's going at 48th overall now when I'm on the clock at 41, because he's my best player. By rankings, he's going to always be the top player on the board in the 40s. So I'm just taking Brees Hall, and that's what I want to do. But then, that doesn't exist for every single player. It also doesn't exist for every single pocket of the draft. Like, sometimes you'll get to the 7th and you're like, I have Bateman over Gabe Davis, but Gabe Davis over the other players that go around Bateman. So I'll take Gabe here and see if I can get Bateman at ADP, because if I take Bateman, Gabe's not going to fall back to me, and I'm not going to like my 8th round pick or whatever. It's like every one of those situations is just a little bit different in the ranks versus ADP discussion.
Yeah. I'll also say, like, the Brees thing, and this might be kind of a personality trait of mine, but I generally do like to take player stands. I think it's fun. It creates kind of a fun feeling. It's a good, it gives me a good lucky feeling when I take a big player stand. But the thing about it is, because it's fun, I'm probably inclined to do it too often. And so what I would say is, like, and I also think there's something to the thing of, like, when you take a player enough times, they start to feel safe.
This is definitely true. This is 100% true.
You sort of convinced yourself that this player is a good pick. And so there's sort of safety in picking them again, because you don't have to make any of those uncertain picks. You can pick a guy who you definitely know is a good pick. And so you kind of end up landing on that guy again and again and again. And this is why I think it's very helpful to, like, review your exposures and stuff, because you can go, I'm drafting this player like he's one of the best values on the board. Like, do I think that? And I will sometimes be like, no, I actually don't. I don't think that he's one of the key edges that I have this year, And so, like, with Brees, for example, I think he's one of the key edges. I think he's one of the best opportunities that we're going to get for a young player who flashed to the level that he flashed, who was a 2nd round pick, who was a very good prospect, underrated prospect, showed receiving ability, showed breakaway ability, has size. Offense is about to improve a lot. Like, if they don't sign Dalvin, I think he's going
to go in the 1st round next year.
He could be like the 102 next year, like, no question. Like, he has that level of upside. So I'm gonna do it. Like, but I do keep checking in. Like, okay, hang on, because are you getting carried away? Are you getting carried away? Because I know that I can get carried away with that stuff. But it's not just with him. Like, I need to kind of check in with with all these guys. And I think as you kind of go through the rankings ADP thing, like there's a temptation, I think, to just maybe ignore the ADP value or ignore the guy who you don't tend to take, who has fallen now past ADP, because you'd rather just take the guy who you kind of have like knighted as a league winner, but maybe mostly just because like you took him enough times. Like maybe it's nothing more than like, this is a guy I take.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think revisiting those takes, like how confident are you in this, you know, in Khalil Herbert? Like Khalil Herbert, I have a bunch of. I like Khalil Herbert, but probably not as much as my portfolio says I do.
Right.
You know, because I just feel comfortable. I need a running back there. I feel pretty comfortable with him. He tends to be available when I need that guy. And I don't mind taking the Falcons. So I'm like, oh, he's a bring back on that. You know, I don't mind taking Fields. You know, I kind of build this game stack or whatever. But there's two other Chicago running backs. And I think both are pretty interesting. So that's been one where I'm like, I probably ended up on Herbert, who I'm at 17% on now, but I think I was above 20 at one point. Like I was like, he's not a 20% player to me. I like him. I definitely want to be overweight, but twice the field's probably fine. I don't need to be absolutely smashing Khalil Herbert. He's not, I don't think he's one of the key players to the season. And at the time that I was above 20% on Herbert, I was below market on, I think, Roshan. I think I was above on Foreman, but now I'm at 11% Foreman and I'm at 9% Roshan. So since I checked in on that, I've gotten both the other Bears backs above the field. Probably still want to get those up a little bit. Probably still want to get Herbert down a little bit. So it's not like I'm out on Herbert. It's just that how confident are you in these there's a difference between a player that you're at 15% on versus a player that you're at 30% on. There's a big difference in what you're saying there, I think.
I love that because I think that is maybe the biggest trap that is most easily fallen into by anyone. I don't care how many drafts you've done. And in fact, the more drafts you do, you might fall into this more because, as you said, there is this weird psychological effect of this happens to me in two tiers where I'll call it 3 tiers of drafts right now. But I've improved, I think, as a player over the last 3 years where I would have really just jumped right into this bear trap before. No pun intended on the Bears reference, but that was Jesus. And it's way too early for me. I haven't had coffee yet for me to be dropping unintentional Bears references. But so from the Amari Cooper zone down to, again, whatever wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk or soon to be Deontay Johnson, in that little pot from the late 3rd to the early 5th, the wide receivers there, like, honestly, they are all the goddamn same to me. Like I prefer a little bit of certain guys. Some guys go better with some stacking things. Some guys go better with some correlation things, but I've told myself this specific pocket of the draft is not my edge at all. I'm not saying I want to have 8% of everyone, but I'm also not saying I want to have 25% of one and 2% of the other. I did, however, start to fall into that. I wasn't setting up a lot of Charger stacks. I forced myself to do a little bit of like, let's take Keenan and Mike Will early and try to get Herbert later. But I just did that a couple times.
That's getting harder.
Yeah, it's harder. And I did that a couple times. And now, like, you know, I don't really like Amari that much. And so, like, I've taken him a couple times, but then I also end up with, well, Amari's only on these Garrett Wilson teams or only on these Brees teams. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I have like 2% Amari and it's all, every team he's on has Brees on it or whatever. And it's like, I'm not saying that you don't want
I think that's okay personally,
but I'm not saying it's wrong. But I'm also not saying it's like you have to do this. You know what I mean? It's like theoretically, if I do want him on one of the Jets superstar teams, I probably want to split it between Wilson and Brees, or a little more Brees and a couple of Wilson, whatever. But there should be a method to the madness. You just get into these tiers. And once, I draft on desktop and I draft on my phone. I mean, I'm a fucking human being. I draft. You know, I sit outside and draft, or I sit on my couch or sit on the toilet and draft like everybody else does. And you just fall into the last 2 times I took Drake London. And you would think intuitively, you would say, Well, you just kept taking Drake London and you don't really have a preference between these guys. But what happens in your brain is the next time you come up and you're like, ooh, Drake London. Yeah.
Right. Drake London's the guy I take.
Yeah. I prefer, and I might actually, I probably do prefer Drake London here. But I've told myself I don't prefer him that much. Like maybe 14% Drake London and 6% Mike Williams or something like that. But instead it's 1% and 20% is what it ends up happening. Right. And your Khalil Herbert example in that tier, I like Damian Harris and Rashad Penny. I like all these guys, I guess. So this is maybe not the exact best example, but I don't hate Khalil Herbert, but I have like 9% Khalil Herbert and 1,000,000,000% of like Damian Harris and Penny. And then Warren goes a little bit later, but he's risen up a lot. And Herbert is, and he's, yeah, exactly. And I do think those guys are edges to the extent of, I like them better. Right. So again, 16 or maybe even 20% those guys, and a little bit lighter on Herbert at 9%. But it's always like, I don't have really much Brian Robinson. And that is, I don't love Brian Robinson. I kind of like the guy, a couple guys more than him. But I draft a lot of zero and hero running back teams. So he's a great fit for those.
Yeah, I have a lot of Brian Robinson because he fits my build.
Right. But this was me falling into that trap. I get to this zone and I prefer Penny and Dame and maybe Herbert, and it used to be Antonio Gibson. Now Gibson has passed him in ADP. But again, I was taking Gibson when he was going in the 120s. Now I don't take him anymore. But like Brian Robinson has always just been the guy who there's no real reason why I don't have like any Brian Robinson. It just happens because I get to that tier and I'm like, okay, I'm building out this zero running back team. Maybe I have, maybe I have Ramondre, or no, not Ramondre. Maybe I have whatever, London. We'll use London. I have London. So Herbert makes more sense on this team. Right. With Brian Robinson, I love the 49ers. It's a little difficult to get them because all three of them go in the first 5 or 6 rounds. I don't have a 49er.
Also,
I don't have.
He's not that appealing as a bring back on the 49ers, who are so good against the run.
Because he's and even if something happens and they're not that good against the run, he's just this grinder, right? Brian Robinson is not. You can't envision Brian Robinson ripping off a couple 70-yard touchdowns.
No, that's not.
Khalil Herbert, that's what he does, right? Is rip off long runs. He's a really impressive runner. Blah blah blah. I can envision Rashad Penny dominating. He did it on the Seahawks. Could he do it on the Eagles? Absolutely. I can envision blah blah blah. Right. Najee being dust or hurt, and Jaylen Warren being the workhorse for the Steelers in Week 17. That seems pretty good to me. But the whole point was, I have no reason. 0% Brian Robinson is not something I went in and I said, this is an edge, right? It's also not even really in my rankings. He's right there amongst all those other guys, but it intuitively happens just because of the kind of the human psychology of the whole thing.
Yeah. There's almost like, I've talked about this before, but it is like, there's almost like a face blindness type of thing that happens where like you can't even see the names of the guys you don't draft. Like I've been in a situation where like, you're multi-tabling or kind of zoned out for a second. You're like, oh crap, I'm on the clock. Like I only have 17 seconds instead of the full 30. Mm-hmm. And like, I forgot what I was doing. I forgot like kind of what the next pick was supposed to be. And I'm like, there's no one here. Like there's like, I'm like not even seeing anyone because it's a bunch of guys who I don't tend to take. Mm-hmm. And on DraftKings, I've noticed that'll happen to me. And then I'll flip from ADP to rankings. And I'm like, oh, there's lots of guys here because it's all now I've seen who I like. And I'm like, oh, I have a ton of options. But, that effect, I think we should be battling that effect to an extent because we're not going to be that accurate. That's a level of accuracy that you simply won't have with a player pool to be that dialed in to in every single round, all the players to take and all the players to avoid. Like this is a surprising game. So that's where I think, forcing yourself to take the ADP value. And I primarily do like to draft off of ADP because I want to see who's the guy who's dropping, way past ADP, who maybe I should mix in. And to me, the way I'll try to do it is like, I'll take a guy from, I'm not drafting this dude at all to I'll draft him correlated. That'll be kind of the first way I get a guy in. Mm-hmm. Or I'll draft a guy way past ADP. Like Kadarius Toney the other day, he dropped to in the 90s, and
Oh my God.
I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get I got sniped one pick before him, but I was like, I was psyched. I was psyched to draft Kadarius Toney, even though like if you told me like place Kadarius Toney, I'd probably put him in the 90s. I'd say he's a value in the 90s, but if the market is going to take him all summer in the 70s,
At pick
and
70,
I can, and I can get him in the mid 90s, like I'm going to jump all over that. So he's that type of player to me, where if I can get him, he, even correlated, I probably would still prefer to get an ADP discount on him. Like if I had Mahomes, let's say I grab Mahomes in like the 303, I got a nice value on him. I'd probably try to push Toney around the 6-7. He's not the type of player who I'd even take in the 6th in that situation. I'd try to get that 7th round value on him, and I'm okay losing out if I don't get him. But that's just how I feel about him. But I'm not so out on him that I wouldn't take him in the 7th round stacked with Mahomes, right? Like that's, I'm trying to, so Odell Beckham's another example. Like I will, if I don't have,
he's a good one,
Andrews, and I don't have both of Bateman and Flowers. I mean, definitely if I don't have either, if I, somehow just have like Lamar and Dobbins, let's say, I'm going to probably take Odell like at ADP at that point, at that next turn.
Even though you have him ranked farther down from ADP,
down
because of the correlation makes him more important to this team.
If I have Bateman or Flowers, then I probably wouldn't take him right there. But if I got an ADP discount on him, I would add him to that. So, he's a player where I'm like, I could be wrong on Odell. He could be healthy. He could be back to what he was with the Rams. He's not going to be back to what he was early in his career, but even with the Rams, he still had something left before he tore the ACL. So, okay. I'll take Odell a little bit here and there, but it's going to be correlated. That's how I'm going to get kind of started with my Odell exposure. But I also think like that helps you expand your player pool. Like that's how I got started with Quentin Johnston, but now I'm like, I'll take Quentin Johnston just on his own sometimes. Not a ton, but sometimes. Or I'll take him as a bring back on an unstacked Judy. I don't have Herbert. That's how I got started with Quentin Johnston. But I'm like, I kind of like Quentin Johnston where he's priced now more than I would have if I just like didn't bother to take him. Zay Flowers, I'm not quite there yet with him because I think he's a bit overpriced, but I think I'll probably get there where I'm like, maybe I can take Zay Flowers as a bring back on Waddle. I don't have Lamar, and then I'll, try to make this a Waddle to a Flowers thing. Like that's probably where I'm headed with Flowers, but I got there because I wasn't taking him at all. And then I was like, why do I have 0% Zay Flowers? That's dumb. First round pick on an offense I like. Stupid not to have any. So I started taking him with Bateman because they were going right next to each other. So Lamar, Flowers, Bateman, get them both. And then it like allows you to be open-minded. Like taking a guy allows you to be open-minded on a guy.
This is the best. I'm glad I was going to bring up the stacking element and I was going to ask you the question and you intuitively answered it. So apparently the smelling of the flowers you did last week has really
really my emotional IQ is
yes. Yeah, exactly. Your emotional IQ is through the roof from the San Diego Flowers. Maybe I'm going to have to take a trip here before the season comes back around. But it could not be more spot on.
It's a Flowers for Algernon situation.
Jesus! And we're talking about Zay Flowers. This is the cheesiest fucking episode we've ever done.
in like another week of New York, I'm gonna be a total asshole again.
Oh, that is great. Yeah, I have to take trips to San Diego just to not be a total douchebag for the whole summer. We can have a small break from the New Yorkness of things, but. God, there's also good that the Zay Flowers thing was in there too. But the last episode that we recorded, which was really, really good, or maybe 2 episodes ago, I can't remember. We talked about just stacking and in general. And a lot of what the stacking conversation led into was a lot of exactly what you just mentioned, where we know, look, if Lamar has a big season, passing the big season in general, but big season passing the ball, probably pretty good for Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, of course, Mark Andrews, Odell Beckham. We know that. We know in a single week, right? Lamar throws 4 touchdowns. They got to go to somebody. We understand the benefits. We understand we need to have high weekly scores, especially in week 17, blah, blah, blah. But the very much downstream, yet extremely important, especially for me, part of correlation, not just inter-team stacking, but correlation, whether it's week 17 or maybe you're playing weekly winners, and that could be the correlation of weekly winners is Jesus Christ, you can galaxy brain yourself to death, right? Any single week of the year, you draft the Ravens and you're drafting against anyone that they play over the course of the entire season, etc. You're drafting all sorts of stuff, but any form of correlation is probably for me the best kind of fail safe for this trap that we've talked about here. Because if you open your mind up to these correlation ideas and use them as a lever, or a tool in your toolkit when you're drafting, it is by far the easiest way to not fall into the traps that we don't want to fall into, generally exposure wise, but also, right, the ADP value game, getting players at the best costs. Structure, you want to make sure that your structure is always good. You want to make sure your portfolio is more in line with what you want your portfolio to be. The absolute number one way to do it is by making sure that correlation is a huge part of your process while you're drafting. If you just set out and you just draft ADP values, or you just draft off of your raw ranks, right? Or you just draft off of this portfolio thing we talked about at the beginning. I want to have 40% Breece Hall. I want to have 25% Kyle Pitts. And you constantly use those as your priority. You fall into so many other traps that you did not mean to. And it's not like you're screwing up in that one draft, but you're screwing up your whole portfolio and your whole process for the summer. That if you just say, I don't like Odell Beckham. I don't. Neither of us do at his cost. Neither of us really like Odell Beckham. But on the teams where Odell Beckham makes sense, I'm going to draft them just how Pat outlined. I don't have any of the guys. Like you said, I only have Dobbins, or I don't have anyone with Lamar. It just didn't work. He got sniped. I'm going to take Odell. I might even, right? Comes to that turn.
At that point.
I'm going to prioritize him, right? I don't know Odell's ADP offhand. He goes in the 120s, let's just say. And he goes at 120.
I think what's the turn where you get the 7-8 turn, you get him on the 9-10 turn is if you're going to prioritize him in that situation, you probably take him in the early 10th.
Right. And in that case, you may not be getting an ADP value, and you may not be taking anywhere near the highest ranked player on your board. And yet he's still probably the right pick. Right. And so that's why correlation and you probably don't have much Odell. You have all the other guys in that range. You also have all the other Ravens, and it's just this really easy, natural way to solve all 10 problems that you can run into, that I know I run into. And just by siding with correlation, I can solve a bunch of different things and make a good team in that draft. It's one thing to just smooth out exposures to smooth them out, or it's one thing to just take ADP value when maybe you're more of a taking a stand bro and you're not always getting ADP value. That's one thing. But the correlation allows you to solve all of those while building this really good team with appropriate correlation. You probably got other ADP values, right? Because you use that lever in other parts of your draft. It's just this fail safe that it's almost like every time we talk, we're like, well, if you just use correlation, you can relieve yourself of that issue that you keep running into.
Your portfolio can't win you anything. Your portfolio is not going to take down a tournament. One team is what's going to take down a tournament, a single team. So therefore, the most important thing is to build internally consistent teams that are built to rise to the top of these single week finals. That's the number one thing, is to have teams that can get you there, but then once there, blow up and finish first in a week 17 final. So the teams need to be built in ways that make sense for that team. You need to have clear bets on offenses. The correlation needs to make sense. It needs to be an internally consistent team, a team that has an outlined path of what happens for this team to finish first in a single week at the end of the season. So, I mean, I really do feel like you could have, I have 4% Odell Beckham. I could have 4% Odell Beckham, and it could be a total catastrophe because I've just like decided to randomly mix him in here and there, or it could be really the 4% Odell Beckham I have is perfectly this Odell Beckham, these Odell Beckham shares that are, correlated with Lamar on a team where I've sort of functionally bet against Andrews or bet against Bateman, because I'm taking him more in the situation, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I'm like, you know what, I'm going to mega stack the Ravens.
Yeah,
and
I like to do that. That's a good one too, where you tack on that player that you don't normally draft because you just said this team. I have Lamar. Maybe you don't have Andrews. You're just making something up. But you took Lamar, Dobbins, Bateman, Zay Flowers. The Ravens are going to have a fucking good season. Okay, if this team so you just say, I don't know, I kind of need a wide receiver. Maybe you took another elite tight end, a couple early running backs. You're not great at wide receiver. I'll throw Odell on there, right? And say, well, clearly Lamar and the Ravens are going to be good, so let's toss Odell onto this team. But again, the whole point is that you're just siding with some form.
And how can that work? How could that possibly work? Well, one way that could work is the Ravens were like the team you had to have in 2022. If they're the team that you had to have, then you have them. So that's awesome. So you probably advanced.
Step one. Yeah, right.
Yeah, step one, you probably advanced because you had the team you had to have. So that's good. Mm-hmm. Now, you couldn't really do this with every team, right? The Panthers are not the team that you had to have in 2022. I feel confident about that. And, no disrespect to Bryce Young, but he is a rookie quarterback and he doesn't have any
shorter than both of us, smaller than both of us.
Yeah.
Size of my dog who's laying down over here. As a Bryce Young.
And I don't mind Bryce Young, right? But I wouldn't just like mega stack the Panthers because I'm definitely advancing now that I have all the Panthers. Like, probably not. But the Ravens would be one of those teams. Certainly there are others where they could be the team that you just had to have this year. And they kind of all advance together, even if you're only hitting singles on a couple of the guys, or even if you strike out on a couple of the guys, just the bet as a whole was so strong that it got you there. That could make Flowers, Odell, Bateman, it could make them at the prices that they have playoff guys as opposed to core guys. Yeah. Because the hit that you had on the offense was so massive that, Lamar, and you probably maybe need an Andrews or a Bateman or a Flowers or one of those guys to also be an absolute smash. But again, we're saying that the team you had to have, they probably are. So you have Lamar's an absolute smash. You have another guy's an absolute smash. A third guy on that team, you kind of almost need less from him. Like, and you don't need nothing, but but all of a sudden he goes from like, I need this dude to help me advance to I need this dude to show up for me in the playoffs. And if the team is absolutely crushing and putting up a ton of points, Zay Flowers is going to have a very quiet rookie year and then have an amazing week 15. That's not going to do much for you on a team that isn't built around the Ravens absolutely crushing. But if it's built around a Ravens team that's absolutely crushing and advancing teams at a super high rate, then all of a sudden Zay Flowers can be pretty powerful on that build.
Just 100%. And I was trying to look up some like similar examples. The 2019 Ravens are actually funny enough a reasonable example of that, where Lamar MVP season breaks out, Andrews breaks out, Marquise Brown breaks out. I believe Mark Ingram was the running back on that team, if I recall correctly. Right. Who, like, all these guys were not as expensive as the Ravens, so it's not like some perfect one-to-one comparison. But the 49ers, quite frankly, have been this, aside from Jimmy. But if we sided with core, you say, I don't give a shit about Jimmy, or I'm not talking about Trey Lance. I'm talking about like a couple years ago where Debo breaks out. George Kittle is one of the best fantasy tight ends. Brandon Ayuk breaks out. They have running backs, whether it's Mostert or Jeff Wilson or any running back that touches the field for the 49ers, right? You just said, I don't know, the 49ers are the team that I need. Debo Samuel's a superstar. He used to go in like the 8th round years ago. Brandon Ayuk is a 2nd round pick, wide receiver. George Kittle's the best tight end, all around tight end in the NFL, right? I'm just going to load up on these 49ers. They're the team that you have to have. And poof, guess what? If you had 5 49ers on your team, were they all going off in any individual week? No, but that's the fun nuance of this format, that I just give me a Raven in week 16 to help me get to week 17. And then I don't give a shit because now I got all of them. They go off again in week 17. I win. right? Or, Dobbins goes off, which we've kind of outlined in the past before. Dobbins goes off in week 16. Your second stack puts you into week 17. And now you have this low-owned, maybe even low-owned Ravens-Dolphins game stack in week 17, which sounds pretty fucking
Very
good.
fun.
Yeah, sounds
pretty
very,
into that.
very, 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 very fun to me. But I just think ultimately the correlation thing is honestly, it's probably taken me multiple years to like really kind of get it down. And I'm certainly not perfect. I just outlined how Brian Robinson has fallen between the cracks, and I do draft 49ers, although we talked about some issues with that. But being cognizant of the fact that these things exist and being cognizant to me of knowing what you believe that your edges are. So you talked about Breece Hall, right? Breece Hall is a flag plant, rubber stamp. I believe this guy is a huge edge in 2023. But everybody probably has a handful of those guys.
Yeah, everyone.
Right? We all do.
That's why we play this, right?
Yeah,
you don't play fantasy football if you don't have flag plant guys.
I can't fathom spending the amount of time I spend on this goddamn game and just being like, yeah, I don't.
And watching football too. Like,
yeah, exactly. I watch every game and like it's fun. Like I just can't fathom not getting any enjoyment out of like I will never. This is a sad state of affairs, but I will never forget for my life the first 4 weeks of Sam Darnold on the Carolina Panthers. He was leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
He was leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns. I drafted tons of DJ Moore, and I was taking a lot of Sam Darnold as a late quarterback. It was amazing being able to post shit on Twitter and being like, "You fucking idiot!" I wasn't saying.
Well, you're gonna get those 4 weeks again with Sam Howell.
Yes, exactly. 4 weeks, and I'll get to dunk on you, and then I'll never talk to you again from week 5 there on. So I don't have to deal with it. Week 1,
it is gonna be. Listen, it's gonna be a rough 4 to 8 weeks for me. I know that. I know that.
And they play the Cardinals in week 1. If you don't think I got tweet drafts ready to roll for that first touchdown against,
you're gonna win
team.
week 1. You're gonna win. I'm ready to get dunked on. Here's my dumb face to be posterized.
That one's going on the next thumbnail as well. But if you don't think I got, though, they play the worst team in the NFL in week 1, so it's gonna be glorious. But like Gabe Davis scored that first touchdown in week 1 on kind of the trick play they ran and around or Statue of Liberty or whatever the fuck it was that they run, and Gabe's running into the end zone untouched. Like if you think I wasn't dancing around my house like celebrating like that, absolutely, that shit's fun. So I couldn't imagine doing it, but it's like you only have that edge on a handful of players. Like, don't fool yourself into thinking, and I'm not even saying that anyone's fooling themselves because it happens to me or you as well, but don't fall into the trap where you end up either you believe you have an edge in every single round of the draft, the guy, or you're like falling into it because of the psychological effects or just because of how things are playing out, right? We all do it. You click the same guy in the round over and over and over.
I would say fall into it and then dig yourself out a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
it's not a bad thing to learn that about yourself.
Yeah, just be reviewing what you're doing and go, oh, this seems like a little bit too much here. I think I'm falling into that trap a little bit here. But to me, drafting's fun. So I do kind of want to just like in any given draft be like, all right, I'm doing this, but then in the back of my mind, enter the draft with like, I am probably not doing enough of this thing or that thing. And so if it arises, then I'll try to course correct a little bit, but only in ways that make sense for that team, for that draft. I'm not going to force it. But if you're constantly reviewing, like, I seem to be falling into this trap a little, then you'll start to be able to course correct naturally as opposed to having to like radically swing and try to get, because the last thing I want to be doing is like, I didn't get any of this player all summer. Let me just draft like 25 teams with him. Like that's not going to work.
And you draft bad versions then of the teams because you're forcing, right? You're forcing a portfolio. As you said, the portfolio doesn't win anything. It's really, and this is the other thing that I think people forget sometimes too, is like, I mean, Pat can clearly speak to this. One team that you draft this summer is going to make your whole season. That could be good, or that could be good, or that could be bad, right? Your highest scoring team could not make the finals, Your best team could not make the finals, and that's going to make your season because you didn't make the finals or make any real money. But the flip side is true. One team, you don't have the slightest idea which one it's going to be. One team is going to decide whether you make no money, a lot of money, a little money, or somewhere in between. One team. And so the teams are what do this. The portfolio is important, but ultimately it is about those teams. And so,
yeah,
go ahead.
And I think about it like you're saying you don't want to draft bad versions of these teams. I mean, this is one way, because another thing that you can get in trouble with, and this is something I think I've gotten a lot better at, but it's only kind of been through practice, is you can get locked into specific structures. And in this round I do this, and in this round I do this, and I kind of start my drafts like this. That's definitely, I think, some of the you got to let the draft fall to you stuff is a bit of a straw man. I think that's often done by people who are very comfortable with their structures and don't want to try.
Yeah.
Structures specifically, usually light running back structures. But you could also just start zero running back too often. And that becomes your dominant structure, the structure you're most comfortable with. You could be avoiding the early quarterbacks all the time. You could be, always grabbing an early quarterback, always grabbing an elite tight end, whatever it is. You could be overweighting specific structures or just kind of doing what's comfortable too much. Especially for me with running back. That was a structure I didn't draft a ton of in 2021. It was one that I wanted to draft more of in 2022. Fortunately, I did, because that's, the team I won with had that start. And it was, to me, when I'm trying to try out a different structure, but I think this also applies at the player level too, it's I'm going to do this better than the people who do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do running back, but I'm going to do it kind of my version, my player archetypes. I'm going to take running back, but with two guys who I think have legendary upside, still following the rules of what I think about early round running back. But, I'm going to take hero running back, but I'm going to, really punt the running back 2 part of that and go to this pocket of the draft that I think is really fertile for running back, whatever it is. Right. Or I've also said the opposite, for people who don't like drafting zero running back, draft zero running back and try to outdraft
That's a good one.
me and Erik. You're these guys don't know their player. They're doing this structure and they're doing it with these players I hate. So do it with this.
They take
use
Dalvin.
Our structure against us. Yeah,
they take Dalvin, as the running back on that team. They take whatever
exactly.
Brian Robinson, right? And then Brian Robinson. They have all those guys on that team. Yeah,
yeah. They have a zero running back team that you would never build.
Never, literally never. Yep.
Right. So you can be directionally accurate. Zero running back. Great year for zero running back. But you didn't have those right running backs that they have, right? And the example of this last year would be Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs was not a guy I was taking a lot of. I don't think you were taking a lot of them.
Nope.
So
I think 2%. I think.
Yeah, if you had Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders on your zero running back team, it's pretty sweet. That was a nice year. That was a nice move. You drafted zero running back better than the zero running back dudes. I think this is a possible thing to do. So it's if you're going to be mixing in structures that you don't feel comfortable with, or that kind of aren't your preferred structures, the structures that don't make you feel comfy, do it with the mindset of, I'm going to do this even better than the people who do this all the time. And to take this to the player level, I don't have much Sam Howell. I'm at 2.5% right now, but
that's more.
Better believe when I have him, he's double stacked with a bring back, and I got him in the 18th round. The Sam Howell I do have is pretty powerful. Sam Howell. It's Sam Howell hits. Those teams are going to look pretty sweet. And if one of those teams bubbles up to the top, no one comes and there's no guy who comes around the train and checks your portfolio. Did you have 18% Howell? For this team to be live, you have to have 18%.
This doesn't count. Yeah, this team. We get to week 17, and you have to submit your exposures. To the ticket keeper and say, I don't think you're allowed to win this if you only drafted 2% Sam Howell. This is for the Sam Howell bros, right? If you posted about Sam Howell on Twitter in a positive light, you're allowed to be here. Yeah. Otherwise,
show me your obnoxious Howell tweets, or otherwise we can't get the money. Did you? Where are they?
Show me you
from
being
week 2.
An
we
asshole.
Want to see week 2. tweets.
Show me you being an asshole to Pat Green on Twitter because he hated Sam Howell. If that tweet does not exist, sorry, this is for the real Sam
Anyone
Howell
who tags
drafters.
Pat Crane can win with Sam Howell. Pat Crane can't win with Sam Howell. That's how this works. No, like you're allowed to take the money home if you win with a Sam Howell team. It was your only time you drafted him. Like that's legal. So,
so true.
Trying to build with the guys you don't normally draft, but building really, really well constructed teams with those guys is important.
I think that is so good. And then also what you said, that kind of honestly like ties it all, everything that we've talked about here together, from the ADP versus ranks versus all the nuance of all that versus exactly, what stands are your edges, and all of that is kind of as simple as you said. Let yourself kind of fall into these most likely traps. This is really what I do. So it's funny, I was sort of being hypocritical, but the draft season starts, right? I mentioned this, that like with the Bucks, I think I was falling into a trap of they're definitely not a trap, but in terms of how I want my teams to look, I was just falling into a little bit of a trap. I just start drafting. I don't create my rankings. I don't really deeply dive into anything. I just start drafting. I
do some player pools. Like I kind of do some like stuff to like kind of review the player pool and guys who I think are targets. Basically, I'll do some sort of initial player research. Is the first thing that I do.
Right. I kind of look at the player pool and say, okay, this guy's going here, this guy's going here, but I don't really have my takes fleshed out. There are 100% teams I drafted on the first day of Best Ball Mania 1 where I'm like, why the fuck did I take that guy? I don't really like him, or I don't like that stack, or whatever, right? Or, oh my God, I took that guy at this price. It's also funny to go back and look at your big board teams. If anybody played in the big board on Underdog, which is pre-NFL draft, some of them you're like, God damn, I'm a genius. And other ones you're just like, oh my God, I'm the worst fantasy football player of all time. Like, there's third round DeAndre Swift on there. There's some teams that don't look so good, but letting yourself kind of, you learn a lot about yourself, what you like, how you draft, the structures you like, what you think about this player pool, your favorite players in every round. You learn all that by kind of, like you said, letting yourself go. Draft 10 teams. If you got 100% of Brian Robinson, right? You're the opposite of us. Brian Robinson's the best pick for you around pick 100. You just keep taking him every time. Well, now you know that. Now you've understood that about yourself. The reason why my ranks and probably Pat's ranks change really anytime they do over the summer, of course, news and things happen. But honestly, I don't react as much to the news anymore, particularly as I used to. What changes now is because I did a bunch of drafts.
A lot of my changes is because I'm drafting a lot.
Right. And so I'm falling into, not necessarily falling into traps, but to expand upon what you were saying, I'm learning about myself. I'm learning I have 0% Brian Robinson. Now I go back and assess that and I say, do I need to move him down? Or was that just an flaw, an error I made in my drafting, right? But you have to let yourself learn that. There's no one on the planet. Pat won a lot of money playing best ball last year. He didn't show up to day one this year with every single answer. He's figuring it out as the summer goes, and you have to let yourself do that, because it's the only way you're ever going to figure out all the nuance of what we started at the top. Do I just take the ADP value here? Do I keep letting him slide? Do I need to? I don't like Odell, but do I need to take Odell right here on this team? Right? Do I take what do I do with my stand that I want to take on Brees? Right? At the 301, you said at the 301, he's not a good pick, but at the 311, you have to learn all of that shit by figuring it out. And yours are going to be different than mine versus someone watching. But I think it's kind of similar to a lot of the conversations we have, where it's all the answers are in the nuance and the details, as opposed to like, should I use ADP versus ranks? Is like the answer to everything is it depends. It always it depends.
Yeah, and like I think the Brees thing, right? Like I passed on at 311 and I took him at 301 on the same day. That type of stuff. I think Sean Siegel's probably the first guy that I've like saw kind of do stuff like that, where I'm just like, what are you doing? Like I've seen you take JSN in the 4th round, and you
said you like JSN. What the fuck? Why you're lying to me? You're lying.
Yeah,
and it is. He's kind of like cryptic in how he acts. Right? He's very kind of straightforward and relaxed and stuff. And so you're like, I find myself getting triggered. Like, Sean, what's going on? Tell me why you're doing this. I'm like pounding the table, but he's right. You're 100% spot on.
Yeah, you don't like want to pin him down on stuff. Like, no, you like this guy here, you must take him here so that I know if I should take him here. And it's like, no, you don't have to. Even if you really like a guy, sometimes it makes sense to pass on and generally we want to be getting the best prices on these players. But, I think to me, building that eternally consistent team or building a team where like I had the Jefferson Olave team, right? Why do I like Breece Hall on that team? Well, I think it's because I have Justin Jefferson, who's amazing. He's going to have a really high advance rate, most likely. As long as he's so good that as long as he stays healthy, he's going to have a great advance rate. And if he doesn't stay healthy, I'm screwed because he's the 101.
Yep.
I got Chris Olave, who I think is an incredible value at the 212. And maybe not an insane value, but just I like that. I like scooping him up. This is on DraftKings, by the way. So the full PPR,
even better.
I like it even more. And okay, so now I'm sitting pretty. What do I want? Well, this is a very top heavy tournament. I want to make sure that I'm maximizing the late season upside with this team that I feel this start that I feel really good about. Who maximizes that late season upside for me? I know Derrick Henry plays the Texans twice, but to me it's still Breece Hall. It's still Breece Hall who's the guy who you just absolutely looking at all your teams going, do I have Breece Hall in this one? Do I have Breece Hall? To me, he's that guy, and we're going to have guys like that where you're going to go through all your teams and go, do I have him here? Do I have him here? Do I have him here? He is a very strong candidate to be that guy in week 15, 16, and 17. And so with that start, I'm like, that's the guy I want. But with the Adams Waddle start, I'm like, I'd rather build out this game stack and see if I can get. Now, I didn't get Lamar or Tua in that build. And so you can go back and go, oh, man, I actually wish I had Breece here instead of Andrews. But Andrews is also an incredible pick at the 311.
Yeah.
And I still like having an Andrews Waddle mini correlation. I mean, those could 100%. That game could go off through them. And I could have, other things going right. I built out additional correlation beyond those. I didn't throw up my hands when I didn't get Tua and Lamar. Like the quarterbacks I have are stacked with bringbacks. Or at least that's what I was tempted. I don't remember the exact team off the top of my head, but that's how I try to play that out if I can't get my primary stuff. So, it's not that, even without the game stack, I still think it was probably the right move to go ahead and take Andrews there, letting the correlation guide my hand. And to me, like the correlation isn't something that's balancing stuff for you. It's not another thing that you have to balance. It's a way of making all those other things balance out more easily, right? Like I'm trying to actually cool off a little bit on Breece right now as this Dalvin Cook thing resolves. What's one way that I could do that? Well, one way is to take a great value on Mark Andrews, who you also really like. Correlation is why I pulled the trigger on that, right? So it's not that correlation was something I was balancing so much as it like steered me like, you said you wanted to do this and here it is, do it. And so I did, right? And so that's to me part of the value of it. The other thing I want to, it came up as you were talking and it just popped in my head. Some of these player stands as you review stuff, one that like really kind of did not make me feel good is I looked at where I had Leonard Fournette, who I'm at 20% on, which is gross and I don't like it. I've gone too far with that. I need to do a couple things. I should probably take a little bit more Zeke. I should probably take more Hunt. That's the big one. And I should probably just, maybe not let myself maybe take more like Jerome Ford or, a running back a little earlier so that I'm done at running back sooner so that I don't have to take my 5th running back or my 6th running back that late. So there's a few different things. However, I will also say that even if I didn't do any of those things, there's no way I would finish. Well, there's not no way because I drafted a bunch of Will Fuller last year. But there's a low chance that I would end up with this level of Fournette exposure when week 1 hits because the bet is that this price, the reason I'm taking Fournette like this is because I don't think this price holds. And I think he's one of the more interesting guys. I think because he's a massive dude who still had a pretty solid success rate last year. I think, be used at the goal line. His receiving efficiency did not fall off. He's always kind of sucked, in my opinion, but he's still the same guy. He's the high value profile remains intact. He was efficient as a receiver. He still rumbles, and he can rumble at the goal line. So the bet is he can actually carve out a bit of a high value touch, targets plus goal line work profile on a new team. I feel more confident, overly confident, clearly based on these percentages, but more confident that he can do that than Kareem Hunt.
Oh yeah.
But then the bet
I
is,
hate Lenny. I despise Lenny, but I think even if you are of the opinion of me of his talent and all that kind of stuff, it's foolish to not consider what the NFL thinks. And Tom Brady and the Bucs have thought, guess what? This is our guy. We're riding with him through all the high value touches. We're going to throw the ball 50 times a game, and he's going to be back there protecting Tom Brady, who can't move, by the way. And he's going to be catching check downs, and he's going to be getting goal line carries on a Super Bowl team. Other teams care about that kind of stuff, right? We can love Dwayne McBride and Deuce Vaughn and Eric Gray and Chase Brown, and we can love all those guys, and that's fine. But the NFL does a lot of the times just say, I'm trying to win a Super Bowl, right? The Bengals are trying to win a Super Bowl. Are they gonna ride with Travion Williams or Chase Brown when it's really nut cutting time? When it's really, they were down in the trenches. Are they gonna say, yeah, it's fine, Chase, go protect Joe Burrow?
I mean, that's my dream scenario. Is he goes to the Bengals. If they cut Mixon, he goes to the Bengals. But that's right. Like, let's say that happened, then that's obviously all of a sudden it looks like I actually should have been drafting more Fournette, even though I definitely shouldn't have. So he goes to the Bengals. His price rises to, I mean, again, a Mixon was cut. I mean, he's like what, like a 5th, 6th round pick. I mean, people would get carried away. I obviously wouldn't take him a single time. Like, I wouldn't take him once.
Correct. Right.
And that's my hope. And I think some of these, was you're reviewing stuff, right? Like some of the, and this is kind of goes to the ADP thing of where I think it's okay to like make bets on closing line value. I don't want to make bets all over the map on closing line value, but like veteran running back who I think does what he does still, and what he does is pretty valuable for fantasy. I mean, he's kind of the ultimate PPR scam guy. Then, I'm making a closing line value bet on this player. So I'm overweight. Now, ideally, I'd be at 16% Fournette as this closing line value bet. But then ideally, I would be at 10% Fournette at the end of the season, or 8% Fournette at the end of the offseason.
Right.
But all my Fournette
exactly
is the cheap Fournette, all of it. And some of it's so cheap, 18th round. I mean, that's like, I want stuff like that. The only way to get stuff like that is to be in some uncomfortable situations at various points in the offseason, because it's going to have to even out from something that's uncomfortable if you're going to be even with the field on the whole, but only get the good prices. At one point, you are overweight and embarrassed to tell your friends that you have 20% Leonard Fournette.
That is, so I have done this year and have done in past years exactly what you did, but the opposite, where I call this the Darrington Evans, or this year the Jerome Ford, where I did the opposite. Hunt is gone, right? Everyone's Jerome Ford. He's never played in the NFL. Basically, he wasn't even anything special, as a college prospect. He was just active to be a return man last year, blah, blah, blah. Right. Darrington Evans, this kid from Appalachian State, Derrick Henry gets all the touches. He's not worthwhile for fantasy, and they could bring in a veteran, right? That's the Jerome Ford thing was this year. He might be the backup now, but they're what if they bring in a veteran? And I mean, they still technically could, but it's the same thing as Fournette. But on the flip side, this is, well, if everyone's scared of Nick Chubb's direct handcuff because of the veteran, I'll take him in the last round, like a lot, right? Like I'll do what same thing with Fournette. The bet can fail, but any bet can fail, right? And absolutely any of these guys can fail. The closing line value thing is a great one, where sometimes, right, if you got not necessarily closing line value with a Josh Jacobs, but the impact of your Josh Jacobs, if you got the cheapest price last year, you waited for all of us to shit on him for 3 months and you took him in the 8th round at the end of the summer, you said this guy's going to fall because all the zero RB bros hate him.
Or like
whatever.
In the Spike Week league we did, I have Josh Jacobs.
Yep.
But, and I got him at a great price because we all didn't like him.
Because you knew that you're in a room of 12 people who hate Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, but I was like, I'll take him here. So
I took David Montgomery. I got the raw end of that deal. I tried to do the exact same thing. I got like 10th round David Montgomery. I just took the one who did really fucking suck. You took the one who was good.
But yeah, I mean, there's sort of a closing line value thing and you getting good prices on guys, even if there's not closing line value. I mean, in some ways that's better, right? If a guy's ADP just keeps
falling.
No, I mean, like
but Jacobs like fell, right? You know what I mean?
Jacobs
he went from
fall, I guess,
4th round to the end. But same thing. But same idea. Just getting a good price on someone, like you said, is true.
It can be more powerful because it's like the only times, like if you scoop a guy, and this maybe could be a reason to draft a player you don't normally draft, like that Tony one, right? Like Tony's probably not going to fall into the 90s. I'm so jealous of that guy.
We'd have to get some bad camp news, like really bad camp news. Otherwise,
really bad.
And
which
we're probably going to get good camp news, which means
exactly.
he's probably only going to go up. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, there's a guy out there is a mid 90s Kadarius Toney. Like I'm super jealous of that. Like that's one reason to scoop those guys who you don't normally take. And it kind of goes to the thing of like, if you're going to have a Kadarius, if I'm going to be underweight Kadarius Toney, but I've got him primarily at big ADP discounts and correlated with Bengals stuff and Chiefs stuff, like that's the way I want. And I want my underweight positions to be powerful underweight positions.
Yes. That's got to be the ringing endorsement of the whole thing that we originally started talking about with the show, like rankings versus ADP versus all these other variables, player stands, all this shit that comes together is kind of like, I want all of my teams to be the best versions of these teams. And a part of that, like you said, I want my Kadarius Toney's teams to be the best fucking Kadarius Toney teams that are in this tournament, because every team, I want every team to be able to win based on a certain thing, like a win condition, right? A scenario plays out, and I want this team to win when that scenario plays out. I don't want
10th.
Yes, I don't, or I made the final, but I got the worst fucking Kadarius Toney team because I took a stand, right? Like you said, your portfolio can't win anything; the team wins it. I took a stand on Kadarius Toney, and guess what? I was right. I've been victory lapping on Twitter all season. You idiots thought there was risk with Kadarius Toney. I was right, but you show up with your one team because you're still probably not going to get. You may not even.
You're going to get one team. That's the other thing about these, like Best Ball Mania. Like you get one team in this year. Like, congratulations, that was an incredible achievement. Like it is going to be very difficult. Like us combined, odds are we'll not
neither of us
get a single team into the finals this year. If either one of us gets a team into the finals, like we ran really hot.
Yes, right. And so even when you nailed Josh Jacobs last year, you nailed Kadarius Toney this year, you might show up with one team to the finals, right? And if Kadarius Toney was a smash, you ain't going to be the only Kadarius Toney team that's in there. Right? Just like you weren't the only, even though Josh Jacobs' playoff run wasn't very good, he was so good for the season, you couldn't possibly be the only Josh Jacobs team. So I want the best one. I want the team that look, I hit Kadarius Toney this season, right? In week 17, how do I take this thing down when Kadarius Toney was right? Because like you said, your portfolio doesn't win it. That team has to win it. So I want all of the best teams around whatever, Kadarius Toney just happened to be this example. It could be that Ravens stack. How do I win with this Ravens stack? Because I've just said they're crushing. I want the best Ravens stacks. I want the best Leonard Fournette teams. I want the best of all of these things, right? And that's why the conversation is so nuanced with, do I just draft off my rankings? No, because you're not always going to get the best teams if you just draft off your rankings, but also the ADP thing. You're not going to get the best teams if all you do is scoop ADP value every single time too.
Yeah, because if you just scoop ADP value, like in both situations, your teams can be incoherent. Sometimes I struggle with Draftkings. They had a promotion to do 3 $10 milli teams over there, and the milli teams, the $10 milli over there is pretty soft. People do crazy stuff, and you can get really good values on guys. But I was multi-tabling. I had the 2 monitors set up, so I was doing 2 drafts at once, and I'm just like, drafting off my rankings, which I prefer to do with DraftKings because the ADP I don't trust as much.
Right.
I probably should have
it's
mentioned this
consistent.
before the 2-hour mark, but like I like drafting off of ADP much more on Underdog than on DraftKings, because DraftKings, the ADP doesn't really inform me that much. Like, I just don't trust the market as much.
Underdog is going to be fairly consistent. Of course, things happen, guys fall, blah, blah, blah. But generally speaking, you can make strong, smart decisions off the ADP on Underdog. DraftKings, everybody kind of does their own thing.
Generally, I can trust that the other drafters in the room will be respecting ADP to a degree on Underdog. Whereas on DraftKings, depending on the tournament, but the $10 Millie tournament in particular, I have no faith at all that they're going to do that.
No.
So I actually think I'm just better off drafting off my rankings there, which have ADP baked in a little bit. But I was multi-tabling the two DraftKings Millie teams, and I was just like getting all these guys that I like, but it wasn't correlated. It was like, I don't think they're that good of teams, even though they have probably a bunch of guys. Like, the odds that I hit on some players who are league winners on both of those teams are, I think, pretty good. Right? I trust my evaluation of this stuff, to an extent. I think I'm going to be directionally accurate with my player takes this year, but I don't think that those teams necessarily really have what it takes to kind of bubble up to the top of a single week. I don't, unfortunately, because I didn't build them with that in mind. I built them with, oh, this guy's here. Awesome. This guy's here. I love him too. Oh, sick. This guy also made it. They're on completely different teams. I would have had to hit the odds that I hit, like the pure nuts, in terms of like, you just had to have all of these players. And they're the players who their offenses happen to run through for the course of the season, and especially for that single week. Like, unlikely. You mean
it's more likely that you and 1.2 million other of your buddies, and 1,000, 1,200 or whatever in the final. Yeah, the fact that to hit that parlay, probably pretty unlikely.
Yeah. So it's like, and you can do that with ADP too. Like, if you just were to scoop the ADP value every time, I think there's been some research showing, like, actually that's a pretty good way to build teams. Like, if you just take the top rated player, someone had a Twitter thread about this. Sorry, I can't remember who it was. I apologize. But it was at the top rated, or the biggest ADP value at each position. If you just did that, so you're still building structurally sound teams, but you're letting the market decide who. That's actually a pretty good way to advance teams. I would be pretty skeptical of that as a best ball mania strategy if you're not utilizing correlation, right? Mm-hmm. If you're doing that plus correlation, actually that maybe would work. Mm-hmm. I could never do it because what
boring.
What are we doing here? Aren't we having fun? You just let the market decide all your plays.
That sounds awful. Yeah, why would I let other people? The whole point of me playing this is because
the whole point is to feel smart, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm doing this. Like, I can do a lot of things to feel stupid. I do that on a daily basis. I don't need to do this. I don't need to pay $25 to let to tell myself that these other people are smarter.
Everyone's smarter than me. $25. Tell me how much smarter you are than me.
Tell me how stupid I am.
Yeah, but I mean, there is. You could do that. Honestly, you probably could. Mm-hmm. It might work.
But you still have to build the team, right? To win the contest.
Internally consistent team.
Advancing, and especially in Best Ball Mania, man. We've talked about it. I've written about it. I'm sure you've written about it. I think people need to remember, a big portion of the prize pool in Best Ball Mania goes to the regular season. So advancing doesn't do shit for you. You got to finish in the regular season side really, 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 really high. That's not an advancing team. That's like one of the highest scoring teams in the regular season.
The nuts.
Yeah, you have to hit the nuts to even get $250. On the playoff side, to advance, you win $5. Profit. You put $25 in, you finish top 2 in your league. Congratulations. You turn that $25 from 9 months or whatever, 6 months of time you sat around and drafted teams and watched, and you made $5 of profit on that $25 team. That's great. You didn't lose money, but that didn't do
well,
shit.
You probably did, though, because, you're not going to, of your 150 teams, you're not going to advance all of them.
You're going to lose money if you advance teams, even if you advance teams at a much higher than average rate, you're going to lose money unless you make a deep run with a team. That's just
like
how
if
the
you
math
advance
works.
30 teams, which is pretty good because you're expected to advance 25. You advance 30 teams, that's $900. 900 divided by
So you lost
3750.
2,800. You lost $2,800.
You lost
You're
3/4
down.
of your money if you max entered. You
Right.
lost
If
76% of that money.
with a 20% advance rate, which is above expectation, if they all die in week 15 and you don't finish in that, right? Even if a couple of those, right? Even if a couple of those teams finish with the $250 regular season payout, which would be really running hot, right? So let's say 2 teams made that 250 and 30 teams advanced. That is what, $1,400?
That's $1,400.
So you lost let's just call it $2,400. You lost $2,400 with an above average advance rate and running pure as the sun on the regular season side. You lost $2,400. So like, think about that. You need to make a deep run. You need to really finish high. You need to get to week 17 and have a big finish.
Yes.
To really make money in this thing.
Or run hotter than the sun in the regular season and take
like
down one of those really tough.
Which you can
someone will do,
but you can do both.
Someone will do that.
Someone's going to do it. Why not us? Right. That's the Bears new. I think the Bears are saying that now. Every team that sucks ass, their new phrase is "Why not us?" I think the Bears.
That's below. No one believes in us. If no one believes in you, you have a chance. If it's why not you, it's not you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not why not you, because you just said why not us, and that's the whole point.
It's a dead giveaway.
No one who's good says why. The Chiefs never said why not us.
They never said. I don't think they've ever said in the entire Reed era.
No, they said it's fucking us, you idiots. Like they said, no, not why not. Why all those guys? Like it's clearly us. We know that it's us. But the people will enjoy it because we almost approached the 2-hour mark. Pat, anything before we get out of here that you got coming after smelling the roses literally for a week? What's on tap here? Is training camp's almost here, man. I can't believe it. I can't believe training camp's almost here.
It's wild. I've got an article that just came out this morning on running back success rate, including a little bit of some Breece Hall propaganda. I don't know if his ADP is going to support my legendary running backs article, because traditionally I've done the top 2 running backs. I normally use FFPC to get or NFFC or some really running back heavy to get the most running backs I can in there.
Yep.
But I haven't traditionally not written about the 3rd round running backs. I may change that this year because I think it's just a very interesting 3rd round. Even Travis Etienne is sort of a pretty interesting guy to talk about with this. But as we talked about, Breece Hall's ADP might even fall out of the 3rd round. So this was a little bit of that legendary Breece Hall. It was a little taste of some of the stuff that really has me on him. His profile in that article is probably 3 times as long as Samaje Perine. Maybe even 4 or 5 times as long. But I was looking at guys who had small sample sizes last year but performed very well in NFL Next Gen success rate, and looking at some other running back metrics, and just kind of basically looking at running back outlooks for that group. It's the 3rd part of a series that I'm doing. It's going to be a 4-part series, so you guys can check that out. A lot of the article is free, so if you just want to sign up for free, you can do that. You can also get $30 off by going to legendaryupside.com/early. That will be running through next Tuesday, where I will be doing a mega stream, a 7 draft mega stream that I'm going to be doing with Erik. Is going to be one of the guests that I have. I'm going to have 18 guests, 7 hours, 18 guests for 7/18. That's the date that I drafted the winning Best Ball Mania team. So a little bit of celebration with that. You guys should check that out on the Legendary Upside YouTube channel. But that will be the last date that I'm running this $30. I'm running it through that 7/18. But if you want to go ahead and get that, if you've been kind of procrastinating getting that, I would recommend going ahead and signing up, getting the $30 off, getting the 40% off Spike Week. I do also have a few Underdog credits left. If you sign up for the early bird, you can get $50 credit on Underdog on my YouTube and podcast feed. The link for the spot where you need to go fill out the form, so I have your username to send to Underdog, will be in the description. Go ahead and sign up. And there's one other thing I was going to mention, but I forget what it was.
Brain is jumbled from 2 hours of talking. Of course, sign up for Legendary Upside so you can get the 40% off of Spike Week, because I'm biased, of course, but the things that we've added this summer, I think the Sickos and the Real Best Ball Bros will really appreciate, in particular with our Draft Hacker, which is via our premium browser extension, overlays that lay onto your, and like an insane amount of options that you can choose that show up on your draft screen on the desktop. When you are drafting, you can see some of the things like Pat and I were talking about. That's how I know I have no Brian Robinson, because when I'm drafting, I get to that range of the draft every time. And a bunch of other guys have, 25% exposure next to him, and Brian Robinson has 1% or whatever. But of course, you can see correlations. We built it out for weekly winners as well. So
actually, I haven't drafted any weekly winners yet because I was traveling and I was like, I'm not going up against these spike week guys.
It is pretty insane. It is pretty insane, honestly. Being able to see the number of game stacks and the specific game stacks that you have in any week over the entire season. You can pull up a player's full schedule, full 17-week schedule, and it will highlight when you have game stacks for those. Tons of different options that you can see for the weekly winner stuff to build. If you want to build for a specific week, if you want to build for a specific team, if you want to build for anything. We built all that in there for the weekly winners, and I'm pretty excited about that. And of course, that has different, you can utilize all these different things across all the different formats. And the Draft Hacker really is in a pretty fun place. So I'm excited about that. And you can get 40% off of it using Leg Up as a promo code. But for that perfect 2-hour time mark that we made it here, we didn't quite get to 2.5, so the people be a little disappointed. I never said let's wrap or
we never did. We never said to close, to wrap things up.
We just talked.
Unless we're not done yet.
This is technically that. We'll cut this before we before we post it.
Go for another hour.
Well, make sure you join Pat's stream, of course, on 7/18. But then we will see you guys again next week. Peace.
Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there. You can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.